The inspiration for the Hitcher was the Doors song Riders in the Storm, which is about a hitchhiking killer. And I always loved the song and thought that it was a great opening for a film. So I started with the screenplay of The Hitcher. I started with the opening 10, 12-odd page scene between Jim Halsey and John Ryder, and basically went from there. I got a copy of the California production manual, first of all, while I was living in Texas, and went down the list of all the producers, and I sent what's called a query letter. Basically, I sent a half-page description of the story, and I kind of dared people to read it. I got a 40% response, and I actually got to Ed Feldman by accident. I'd sent the letter actually to a producer named Phil Feldman, who produced The Wild Bunch, and I thought, well, it's probably a good idea to take a look at The Hitcher. And it got to Ed's company by accident.
My associate at the time, David Bombeck, thought there was a very good idea for a movie, and he said, could he develop it? And so we developed the movie over the phone. We never met Eric Red until we had the final draft of the picture. We used to he would be on payphones in Texas, and we would talk over the project with him.
Between the time I was a still photographer and the time I became a director, I was a cameraman. I was a DP for some number of years. Not something I really wanted to do for a living, but I felt this was a logical progression from still photography and a position in which I could really learn much more clearly how movies are made and get closer to the action, so to speak.
And Robert had done a short film called China Lake, which had it was about a rogue cop, and it was shot in widescreen and had the same sense of hard-edged realism and violent psychology.
And China Lake was in the same spirit and genre as The Hitcher. And he had been a stills cameraman. And I don't know, we were just overwhelmed by his work on China Lake.
My agent at the time called, and I still remember his words. He said to me, I have a project I'm going to send you. And you're not going to believe, he said, how much fun you're going to have making this movie. My agent sent over the script of this thing called The Hitcher. And as I was reading it, I was thinking, oh boy, did I ever make the right short film to get this job? Because I had in effect already made the movie.
Well, John Seale had done Witness for me. Just to meet John Seale, you want to keep working with him forever. He's really such a unique individual.
And Ed said, you should listen, you should check out this guy, John Seale. Of course, I'd never heard of him. Nobody in America had heard of him at that time.
I wasn't too impressed with the script. I did feel that there were an awful lot of people killed in the first 36 minutes. And a lot of it, as written, was slow motion death. And I wasn't really and honestly prepared for that. So I had a long talk to Robert Harmon on the phone and proffered that and said, look, I'm a little worried that there's so many people just getting slaughtered in slow motion. And he said, no, let me tell you how I'd like to see the film made. And I think 23 minutes later, I signed up.
And I hired him. I'd never met him. I met him the first time when he came to LA to begin work on the movie. And it proved to be a very happy collaboration. There was a brief period I recall in which we were discussing Terence Stamp, somebody I was very interested in. And it didn't work out. Terence was very clear that he felt that it would take him in a place he didn't want to go at that moment. That's how he put it. And he's been very kind in the years since. I run into him every now and then, and he has always expressed regret that he had made the decision because apparently he's a fan of the movie.
Sam Elliott came to an interview. We interviewed him one Sunday morning at somebody's office in the San Fernando Valley. He was so scary that I was afraid to go out in my car and even drive by anyone. But I thought he was going to do the film, and then he backed out at the 11th hour. And we got Rutger. We were very fortunate, to get an actor of Rutger's caliber.
Yes, Rutger was, I thought, an unattainable possibility. I believe what pushed him over the edge was that he screened my short. He wanted to see what I had done as a director.
I saw a short film that he had financed himself because he was tired of being a set photographer or a Playboy photographer he was for 2 years, and he wanted to photograph movies. And it was a wonderful movie.
I saw that film along with the script, and I just felt, look, I got to do this movie.
John Ryder is, on one hand, a very tough, resourceful murderous character, but on another hand, no longer wants to live or continue. But he wants to stick around long enough to pass on to this one kid, this one person who he finds has a force of life, how to be, in his terms, strong enough to survive.
In the original script, it was described as skeletal, with apologies to him. I remember that Eric Red used to talk about Keith Richards as the model. He was also described in the script that I recall reading first as having no natural voice, but he had a sort of an electronic voice box. I think in general, the portrayal physically and emotionally of the Ryder character in the original script was a little bit more monstrous. You know, he was certainly a human being, but he was, I think, without goodness, without any quality of anything human. He was just a force of horror and an awfulness.
There's so many elements to it that we think about, because Rutger's character shows up at the right time, at the right place. Is he magic? Is he supernatural?
John Ryder, that's a rental company. This guy's name is not John Ryder, forget it. And to me, he doesn't exist. He's just a piece, he's just a ghost that comes out of the desert sand and starts haunting people.
He's shooting down helicopters with pistols. He's slicing people up left and right, and they can't catch him. He can sneak into a jailhouse and kill all the cops and unlock my cell without me knowing.
There are valid criticisms of the movie in terms of, how could he pop up here, and how could he pop up there, and how could he know where he was, and all those questions, which are, from one point of view, valid questions, but from my point of view, and I believe from Eric's and Feldman's and all the other filmmakers involved in the movie, the questions are not appropriate, you might say. It's just, if you don't get it, you don't get it, but the movie's not supposed to work on this super real level.
I think it's a normal story of a serial killer, except the cleverness of the script made it more. He made the man more than just a character on television where you see villains today. I think it's one of the most horrific characters in the history of films. And I think that's why the picture was enjoyed the success it did.
To me, the first thing that is scary about a character is intelligence. If the guy is intelligent, and now we know they are around, but that's scary. So you can't fool him too easily. You have to be smart to fool him. It lifts up the whole story. It lifts up the bad guy. It lifts up the hero. The more complicated and more complex the bad guy is, the better the hero is off when he finally gets it.
My character shows him that I want to win, that I'm not so fearful that I'll just collapse and let you stick that knife in my heart and drain my life. I want to survive. And he recognizes that, and that inspires him to take me to the next level. He says, okay, kid, I'm taking you on a ride.
In terms of the character, I thought, this is a guy who knows he's very sick, but he doesn't quite know where to go to have it fixed, or he doesn't know how to end it. He is a coward too. If he would have the guts to commit suicide, that'll be fine, but he doesn't have that. So I guess in his, somewhere in his mind, he comes up with an idea that if he can just find somebody who gives a little shit and he can have some fun with, and then he'll ask him to just take him out of the way.
No, I thought Rutger's character was a very well-balanced weirdo in the desert, and very frightening because of that, because he was subdued too. He just wasn't some screaming maniac. He was very subdued and evil about the whole thing, and I think that built a suspense in the film that might not have occurred otherwise.
Ryder wants to teach the kid, train the kid, make him, strengthen him, forge him. And the kid, like all people who are, in the process or being challenged by someone, has both a terror and a respect for this guy, and also, by the end of it, a desire to rid the world of him.
It may be a slightly twisted view of it, but at the end of the movie, I certainly have always felt that Tommy is left to wonder whether or not, if he could, if the Halsey character could turn back the clock and choose to have never met John Ryder, I'm not so sure that he would choose that he would change anything. I was doing a tremendous amount of driving around the California area looking for locations. So it was incredibly carefully picked locations.
It was shot down in the areas around El Centro, California, on through the Death Valley onto the Vegas area. So you get that really old-style Western look.
A lot of the pre-production was trying to suss out how Robert wanted to handle it and how to make the desert, look basically a beautiful place where this madness was going on.
I don't know how many people respond to this, but it was shot in a widescreen format, in true anamorphic and 235 Panavision. And if you see it in that form, certainly on a screen, on a big screen, it has a certain scope to it. And I also think so much of the movie is about, you might say, figures in a landscape. And as soon as you begin to have enormous scope shots with small cars and small figures, you start to feel a certain scale to it. I feel that John's great strength is that his work is beautiful, but always natural. You don't get the feeling, for the most part, of a cameraman trying to show off.
In some ways, I feel putting the camera in the area that the actors must be in, say like inside a car or a small jail cell or shed or whatever. If the camera's included with the actors inside, somehow I think it's a better way of making a film than when you pull the wall out. The actor's psyche knows that it's a fake set. We know it's a fake set, and the camera almost proves that it's a fake set because it can shoot from angles that aren't real.
That's good stuff, It's not television, it's big and it's wide, it's open.
The process of working with a younger director, I find, can be quite exciting because they know no limitations. Their imagination goes rampant, and in a way that's fun because Eric's writing was like rampant. He had this stuff in there, and then Robert, I think very wisely, was pulling it back and doing it by inference. And I think that young innocence of new writers and new directors is very exciting to work with.
The experience was very intense, and I was a young actor with limited skills and limited tools at the age of 18 that was put into a very life-altering situation. I mean, as I'm talking in my real life, not in the movie. I really had to deal with Rutger, who was just very intense, and that was possibly the peak of his Rutgerness, if that makes any sense. And he was a very intense, very intimidating person.
I remember how excited he was when he knew that we were going to do it, and he said, I've never acted before really, and now I'm going to act now. And he was stoked. And what I loved specifically about him, that he was totally into whatever would happen between us in the scene.
And I was also working with the amazing Jennifer Jason Leigh, who is as equally intense when it comes to her craft, because this is an actress who has many skills and many tools in her bag. And she made the choice to never break character out of the scene, in the scene. I mean, she was always that character. So here I was, the third in this triangle of some people who showed up every day to kick some ass. And I felt, for the first time, pressure, what real pressure was to deliver.
I was just, as creative as I can be, and I always come up with hundreds of ideas, and then it's sort of up to the director to say, okay, that can go, and that you can keep, and
And I was fascinated working with him. I mean, I just couldn't, he'd be driving down the desert full speed in a black truck, and there's a white hanky blowing out the window of the truck, and that's just Rutger just holding a hanky out as he's driving. And the director's not going to say, "Hey, bro, don't put the hanky out the window."
The sport of this picture, to me, and the way the character sort of dances around with the characters in the movie and with the audience as well, is that he has to put them on the wrong leg in order to surprise them again. And that was my goal, basically.
The thing is he doesn't sit down and explain to everybody, "Okay, director, this is what I'm doing. Producers, this is what I'm doing." I mean, he just goes, and we're all going, "What's he got the white hanky out the window for?" "I don't know. Do you want to ask him?" not really. What's for lunch? And you watch it, and it's just, there's a reason for it, and it pays off at the end.
There's a wonderful scene where Ryder's just shot the two police officers in the car when he's tried to turn himself in, and the kid grabs a gun, and he's going to commit suicide. There's no reason to live. The nightmare's got to end, and he puts the gun under his jaw.
When the director yelled action, it was like something took over. There was this, and it's a really beautiful moment where I fell out of the car and I raised my fingers and I started going bang, bang, and kind of losing it. And I started to rub this dirt in my face, and I looked up to the sky, kind of pleading to God, just in time, which normally would have ruined the movie, for a big cloud to move away and hit me right in the face. And that's when my character just stood up, shook it off, and said, I'm gonna meet this guy. I'm gonna take this guy on. And it all happened in that moment. The director was clever enough to appreciate the work that took place, as opposed to, we had a lighting change, we gotta do that one more time. My DP, John Seals, who's an Academy Award-winning DP, probably my favorite and most talented DP I've ever worked with, said, in his Australian accent, "Oi, mate, look at that there. Let's just get another shot of that cloud going by," and we cut it in, and it's a brilliant moment, mate. And that's what they did.
Rutger was an amazing man. I remember one scene at the petrol gas station that he had to drive out of the shed of the garage, out of the door, and smash the door, and then he had to go up and around and come back and knock over all the petrol pumps. And the stunt coordinator tried it with the door open, and he drove out, roared up the top, turned the wheel, couldn't make it, slammed it in reverse, went back, filled, came down and knocked over the pumps, and Rutger just stood there looking at it. And he said, "Let me do it, we'll roll film." So all the cameras were set up and we rolled film. And he crashed out of that garage. He went up and did a full power turn without stopping and backing and filling, and roared down and knocked the pumps over. And I think the poor stuntmen sat there with their mouths open, because he did something that really, even a good stuntman was having trouble doing, and he just did it like that.
There was a love scene in the motel room. But I remember when we were going to film that scene, Jennifer, I believe, wasn't feeling that was a truthful moment. She felt like that was one of those Hollywood moments that, like, okay, well, here's where the guy in the movie sleeps with the girl in the movie. Well, wait a minute. Everybody's dead and we're running for our lives. Hello?
That scene was changed a bit. It didn't seem to feel right that Nash and Halsey would have sex. There was something it's not a consummated relationship between the two of them. It was better to keep the tension that it might happen, but not consummate it.
They already like each other. They're surviving. There's already a bond. It's a survival bond, and that's heavier than anything.
I feel a film scorer's job is to help tell the story, to help. In a sense, you should almost be able to turn the dialogue off and have the music tell the story.
There was a film called Mrs. Soulful that Mark did the score for. Again, it must have been one of his very first scores. And I thought it was fantastic. I really liked the movie too. But I walked out of the movie and I was so amazed by the music.
He just called me. He must have gotten my phone number from my agent or something, and said, I've been a fan of yours. And we had several long phone conversations long before we met, and he just expressed his enthusiasm and was describing what he wanted to make, and it all sounded fascinating to me.
And he said yes. And I still don't quite know why, but we've been friends ever since and worked together many times.
I fortunately came into this business when video was available to the common man, and so I could have a video machine at home and work directly to the picture. Having a synthesizer keyboard and a computer so I can play something in, record it in the computer, hit play on the video, hit play on the computer, and become an audience for a moment and just see, is it working? Is there a connection there? And then the good news is that the director can come and sit next to me, and we can have that discussion before we have to get on the dubbing stage and spend lots of money to record anything for real. We can test it out on ourselves. and we can interact, and we can move it. You know, we can try it 5 seconds earlier. We can take the drums out. We can, you know, play the melody backwards. We can get it the way both he and I know that we're going to want it.
He just enhances the visualization. He just brings you to it. He becomes one with it, as opposed to sometimes I think score can be a distraction for me when I'm watching a movie and all of a sudden, oh, there's the score. Oh yeah, this is a movie. You know, instead of an experience where it's all becomes one and it goes together. And that's what this score of this film did for me, which I loved. I mean, it really is one with the film, and you don't feel that the score is a distraction.
It's a turn on to me, you know, the sounds, how you put the sound of a movie together, because sound goes straight to your heart. It does not go through a filter of, you've seen this before. You have never heard anything before like this, because it's always original.
I think we previewed the film in New Jersey. It was all very fun.
There's certain moments, of course, in the film where they scream, and then when Nash dies, you can hear people in the audience saying, "It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Oh my God!" You know?
It was so much fun. They were on their chairs, and that's the moment, you know, you work for, to see how it gets there and how it is received, and then you know that you did it right.
Some people came over and thought it was a masterpiece. Some people wanted to kill me. I mean, there was a couple of nuns came over to me in the theater and say, "How dare you show this movie?"
And I think it has to do with the realism of the psychology between John Ryder and Jim Halsey. It's not a Freddy movie. It's not a Candyman movie. It's not a guy in a ski mask with a machete that's some kind of fantasy.
The LA Times decided they wanted to do the cover story of the Sunday LA Times magazine about the movie. And we thought, wow, that's fantastic. It'll be on the cover of the, you know, it's called Calendar section of the Los Angeles Times. And we were all interviewed, and it was all very positive feeling. You know, it was all very laudatory, sort of, the movie, and how effective it is, and all kinds of issues. And we're all thinking, this is great. This will be wonderful publicity, and it'll be fantastic. So we all are interviewed, and the day comes for this front cover story of the LA Times calendar to come out. And I remember opening the paper and looking at the front page of the calendar and thinking, I must be dreaming, because the headline of the story on the front page was a large shot of Rutger with his coat blowing in the wind. It was a still from the movie, from what we used to call the ghost gas, you know, this dust storm and Rutger's long coat. And it was a very evocative shot. But the headline read, "How do these movies get made?" by, I forgot her name. And it was basically a story which we all felt we had been thoroughly tricked by this journalist, because there was no hint in her discussion of the questions or what the nature of the take of the story was going to be, that it was in effect not even necessarily negative about the movie, but it was a kind of a moralistic, quote, these movies, how do these movies get made that are so horrifying and so frightening?
Years later, in fact, it was only about a year ago when a woman that I met heard that I'd photographed The Hitcher, and she said, that dreadful film, she said, how could you have torn that child apart between those trucks? And I thought, she's sounding like she actually saw it. And I said, but you didn't see that. I said, there was just a fantastic little editing of you know, the accelerator going up and down, the clutch coming in and out, Rutger saying, shoot me, and the gun in his forehead, and the kid not being able to shoot. And I said, and then the revving and the clutch and the revving and the clutch, and then suddenly the wheel turns and you hear a scream and you go to black. She said, not at all true. I saw that poor child get torn apart. And I thought to myself, I know what's happened. You closed your eyes and you saw it in your mind's eye. And when you opened your eyes, we were into the next scene. And for all intents and purposes, she had seen Jennifer Jason Leigh torn apart, but you never see it.
When Jennifer Jason Leigh is torn apart, supposedly the good old Indian way, you know, because it's the medieval period, they used to do that, and the Indians sort of did some of that too. 4 horses, and here they go. Yeah, we're funny creatures. You know, Blade Runner is 22 years ago, and this is 15 years ago. But these are, to me, they're big moments because they give you trust. Because if you feel that strong about something, there's something to be found, and there's no way, or there's no use in fighting it.
I think the people who love movies regard The Hitcher as a classic of its kind. And they don't make pictures really like that anymore.
The Hitcher is just my kind of movie, man. Good acting, good cinematography, wicked stunts, and a hell of a story. What else do you want?